Well, guys, I guess I got some news about 10, 15 minutes ago. This interview tonight is actually a really good one with my friend Joe Kent, a hero, a war hero, a fighter, a Gold Star husband, all-around badass. But we actually taped it like 2 hours ago, a couple hours ago, because he was in town, and I was like, hey, I'm going to help you with a fundraiser. Let's do whatever we can, because I believe we are in a fight for the future of our country, for our very existence. And man, I guess I was proven even more right than I would have ever imagined, because apparently, Soros-backed Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is actually indicting my father. So let's be clear, folks. This is like communist level shit. This is stuff that would make Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, it would make them blush. It's so flagrant. It's so crazed. When even like the radical leftists of the Washington Post are out there saying, it's not really based on facts, it's not really based on the law, it's not really based in reality, but it's 100% based on politics. When your enemies are saying that, it's got to tell you everything you need to know right now about where we are as a country. You see what's going on this weekend and the apologies for the trans shooter. You saw the press secretary, maybe. I know I tweeted about it earlier, saying, we're really concerned about the trans community. Yeah, because it's them, right? It's them. So apparently, this corrupt leftist DA is indicting my father on claims that even the federal government that spent 6 years trying to put him in jail, even they didn't want to touch it, and yet they go forward. So let's be very clear, because there were a couple Republicans, people who have proven themselves to be rhinos while, trying to wear the MAGA cap. Let's be clear, for those people who said, it's not real, Trump's making it up, it's not a real issue for us. If you don't think that the weaponization of the entire federal government against their political enemies, against the voters, half of the country, approximately, as we've seen. If you don't think that's a problem, you don't even belong in any position in government, let alone president. I get you can have your sound bites and you can do your nonsense and pretend you're doing great and hire your influencers, but if you don't think that's an issue, guess what? Just wait till they come for you, because they will. We're in a battle for our existence. And this entire case hinges on unreliable, discredited witnesses like Stormy Daniels, who I believe owes my father a couple $100,000 in legal fees because they lost. It hinged on disgraced, jailed, disbarred clown lawyer Michael Cohen, along with a really shaky and murky legal theory surrounding campaign finance law. Again, that the people who actually look at campaign finance law, like the feds, they didn't even look at it. A state district attorney has no business prosecuting a federal campaign violation, but that doesn't matter. Who cares, guys? The law doesn't really matter if you can weaponize it against conservatives, if you can weaponize it against people who are going to take on the swamp. Notice they don't do this to the Biden administration or to the Biden family or to the Clintons or to any one of the corrupt Democrats out there that have made millions and probably billions, where there's smoke like you wouldn't believe. It's not even a story. That's Russian disinformation, as backed up by mainstream media, by big tech, by people from the intelligence community who know. When they lie to you, when they lie to your face, there's no consequence, there's no nothing. Now, if it was the other way and you talk about the Biden administration, oh, you can't possibly do that. No. It's only Trump. So this is weaponized justice at its absolute worst. Okay? I've thought America was going on a downhill slope for quite some time, and that's why my father got in this game, to fight back for the American people. When I see this, and when I see the weak-kneed Republican response of, it's not really an issue, yeah, because it's not on you yet, but it will be. They've made that very clear. Look at what we saw just today. The QAnon shaman released 14 months early after spending 2 years in jail unnecessarily because the Democrats wouldn't release the exculpatory video that got him out of jail now. The guy did almost 3 years in jail for a nonviolent offense. And then it was shown that he was essentially escorted around the building. Can't show that video, can't give that to him, because that would get him out of it. Because that would actually clear everyone else who's been in jail. We had Joe McBride on here 2 weeks ago talking about just that, a lawyer who represents some of these jailed peaceful defendants. Now, they'll spend time in jail, but if you burn down a building, if you kill David Dorn, it's in the name of social justice, it doesn't really matter. It's different. So if you don't think that this is the weaponization of justice, if you don't think that there's a two-tiered system of justice depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on, you haven't been watching. So again, this is me getting this information a few minutes ago. But if you're an American, not a Republican or a Democrat, and you don't see this for what it is, and you're not outraged about the insanity, if you don't see this as sort of the trumped up, pardon the pun, charges to try to do whatever damage you can to your political enemies, then you haven't been watching. And if you're a conservative, having seen everything we've seen transpire over the last 6 or 7 years, and you still believe the nonsense, and you haven't been totally jaded by the media, by big tech, by the lies, by the Democrat Party, then I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you because you haven't been watching or you're stupid. Honestly, if you don't see it for what it is, at this point, I have no other response other than, man, you need a better education. Or you've been brainwashed by the radical left, the same people that tell you that it was the shooter this weekend and its community that was the victim, not the 6 young Christians murdered in cold blood by a trans sociopath, fed every excuse, boosted by that same radical media and big tech, who, God forbid you say something against them, you'll be canceled. We gotta kowtow to every whim and every desire. Someone who's been turned into a freak show by getting jacked up with testosterone and meds in their youth before they could probably make these decisions. No, this is going to be a wonderful result, folks. It's going to keep getting better. It's not. It's only going to get worse until we say enough is enough, until we call out this nonsense, until we all become unafraid to speak up against these injustices. That's all it is. Again, when even the radical lunatics at the Amazon/Bezos Washington Post are saying, I don't know, this is kind of sketchy. When the Republicans like Ron DeSantis say, well, this isn't a real issue, really? Just wait, Ron. One day you may be the man. The way you've handled the last couple weeks, I actually hope not, unfortunately, and I had pretty solid aspirations for you. I thought it was going somewhere, but if you can't figure out that this is a real problem, if you think it's trumped up, as you've said very clearly, as you flip-flop on things like getting in or out of the war in Ukraine because your donors tell you what to do, guys, if you're one of those Republicans, we don't need you. We had our Jeb Bushes. We've had our Liz Cheneys. We've listened to the Karl Roves get us into the endless wars. We don't need that again. So remember, folks, I'll probably end up doing a special on this on the weekend. Like I said, I found out about this about 15 minutes before I went live. I was literally getting in my car to drive to an event for Joe Kent when like my phone starts blowing up and I'm like, oh crap. So I don't even know what it means yet. I know what it means. It's, you know, the same old thing. They got him now and they'll do this and they'll get their show trial or whatever, or at least the show perp walk, or that's what they'll try. You know, they'll raise countless dollars from the communists in New York City and California because they're doing what's right. Because, you know, remember, you know, they want democracy. Yeah, this doesn't exactly look like democracy, but it doesn't matter, right? That's just a soundbite for complete and total capitulation. You know, they love you and your opinion if it's exactly what they tell you it is. Now, if you deviate a little bit, then you're canceled. By the way, if we're talking about the trans issue, look at what they did to Martina Navratilova, who was like a gay icon before it was cool. Someone who fought for gay and lesbian rights before that made you like immune to criticism. And when she came out a couple of years ago and said, hey man, I don't think there should be biological men in women's sports, as one of the most accomplished women athlete ever, the community canceled her. They went after her. 30 years of fighting for their rights meant nothing anymore. They only accept total surrender. We can't go for it anymore, guys. So I'm going to go make some phone calls. I'm going to look into this further. I'm going to see, you know, what exactly it means and, you know, talk to the team. Maybe we'll have to do a special over the weekend. I just, you know, I don't have much more to say other than the insanity of what it is. The weak-kneed response from so many Republicans, especially those that, you know, have done a really good job of paying influencers to make them seem really MAGA. You know, hey, I get it. Unfortunately, that's the game, and that's what it is for them. You know, they don't really care about these things. They care about what their donors ultimately tell them because that's where they get their money that allows them to continue and perpetuate their careers. That's why they hate Trump, because Trump doesn't really need them. It's why they've pulled all the stops to go after Trump for 6 years. I know a little bit about it myself because they did the same to me. And it's never going to end, folks, until we say enough is enough. Again, until we become unafraid to speak out. They have spent probably trillions putting you in your place. They hate your guts. They despise you if you're a patriotic American with traditional American values. They want to weaponize anything against you. You, the vast majority of Americans, mean nothing compared to some radical, insane, but heavily funded, boosted group that make up a tiny fraction of the population. Guys, what we saw this weekend, it's all part of the same sick and disgusting trend. So I'm going to go dissect a little bit more of this. Watch the rest of the interview. You're going to want to see my take again on the shooting. You're going to want to hear from Joe Kent, one of the few guys that really gets what's going on, doesn't just talk about the issues in his home state, but the sort of geopolitical consequence of all of that. We taped that a couple hours ago, again, before I found all of this out. But I think you'll find it enlightening anyway because, man, I should not have to be one of the few people aggressively pushing back on this, or one of the few people perhaps with a platform pushing back on this insanity. But as long as I am, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate your support in just helping get the truth out. So share this, talk about the insanity, become unafraid. Check out this interview because, again, I think the other things that we're talking about, certainly in my intro, the rest of it, literally, they go hand in hand. The issues themselves have nothing to do with each other, but it's that power, that the weaponization of anything against what would be considered at any other point in civilized history, good, decent, moral values. That's all on the table, guys, and they've made it very, very clear. So thank you, and like I said, I'll give you guys some information. Maybe I'll do a special this weekend, or hit it hard on Monday, just depending on what I can kind of find out and when. But it'll be interesting to see the response, and maybe this will get a couple Republicans to finally flip-flop and do the right thing, and the thing that all of us would actually want, but their donors maybe didn't. But we know it'll be fake, so who cares? And we'll see. But guys, thank you very much. Check this out. Today's Thursday, March 30th, and welcome to another episode of Triggered. Tonight's guest will be Army Special Forces veteran Joe Kent. Great soldier, great patriot, has been running for Congress to push back against the nonsense, and also an incredible Gold Star husband who understands the pitfalls of our never-ending wars and insane policy. But before we get to Joe, we have some awful news. As you all have probably been seeing this week, 3 children and 3 school staff members were gunned down in a shooting at a Christian elementary school on Monday. The killer is a woman named Audrey Hale, who was transgendered and wanted to go by the pronouns he, him. There's also a report out that the shooter was having private sessions with the school's head pastor, whose daughter was gunned down in cold blood as part of this deranged sociopath's murder spree. We'll continue to follow that big development, but as always, the immediate response to this disgusting massacre is to blame guns. Not to blame the mental health effects or side effects of puberty blockers, not to do or talk about the indoctrination of these children, not to talk about the insanity that is being driven down their throats in our public school systems and elsewhere by the radicalized trans movement. No, folks, it's not that. It's always guns. Again, we're jacking up our kids with nonsense, both in and out. Kids who are already struggling mentally with the radical indoctrination of unstable people. And no, it's the gun. Let's talk about that, folks. No gun law would have stopped this tragedy. The only policy that could have stopped it is making schools more secure. The shooter apparently was looking at multiple similar targets and chose this school because it was a path of least resistance, because it was a gun-free zone. And gun-free zones are targets for these maniacs. But guys, that's not stopping Joe Biden or Pelosi or a bunch of the gun-grabbing Democrats from pushing their assault weapons ban. And this isn't any normal shooting. It appears to be an act of terrorism, a hate crime against Christians. The killer had a manifesto. Where is it? These things are always released. I have read and seen that the killer said, "You come after our kids and we'll kill your kids." By the way, folks, like some of the most radical terrorists in the world don't deliberately just target children. And yet that seems to be what happened here. If someone committed a hate crime against the trans community, literally all of corporate America would be up in arms. There would be outrage. There would be vigils. There would be telethons. But when someone from that very protected class, seemingly above the law, protected by big tech, protected by mainstream media, literally protected by everyone, ends up shooting up a Christian school, murdering 6, 3 of whom were young 9-year-old kids. It's crickets or excuses. Or, in the case of Joe Biden, it's laughter. Look at how he responded when a reporter asked if he'd agree with Senator Josh Hawley's demand to label this a hate crime.
Nashville school shooting. You believe that Christians were targeted? I have no idea. Josh Hawley believes they were. What do you say to that? Well, I probably don't that. Probably don't.
Are you kidding me? Are you insane? Would Biden smile like that if a Muslim school was attacked? The priority right now from Democrats, besides taking away Americans' rights to keep and bear arms, is protecting the so-called trans community. Not children, not Christians, not God-fearing patriotic Americans who are under assault. No. We gotta protect the shooter. And when the news of the shooting broke, Biden, as usual, started talking about ice cream. Sort of brings up the old Norm Macdonald joke. You know, what really terrifies me is if ISIS were to detonate a nuclear device and kill 50 million Americans, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims. I mean, that's basically what they're saying. This has come to fruition. Look at these headlines from ABC News. Anti-trans sentiment follows Nashville shooting as some conservatives focus on the shooter's identity. Oh, really? Focus on the identity? That's all the news does. Again, if they focus on your identity, if you're part of the trans community, you're immune to anything. Criticism, you're immune to accountability. You're totally immune. But the people who've been playing identity politics for the last few years, all of a sudden are concerned about identity? From NBC News. Fear pervades Tennessee's trans community amid focus on Nashville shooter's gender identity. Guess what, folks? They've been jamming gender identity down our throats for years. They're indoctrinating with our children with it in their schools. And now they're focused. We shouldn't really be talking about gender identity. No. We shouldn't talk about any of the real causes for that. We shouldn't talk about the violent rise of trans activists. They actually quote a trans activist saying, "We were already fearing for our lives. Now it's even worse." Yeah, because they're the victims in all of this, folks. The shooter is the victim. Let's pretend that's the case and not the 6 innocent Christians being mowed down. Again, the crickets from corporate America is mind-boggling, given what we've seen when any one of their identity politics groups is actually the victim of something. And even USA Today was concerned about police, quote, misgendering the shooter. Really? Like, that's what you're concerned about? Not the hate crime that clearly happened? Not the targeting of children deliberately by a deranged sociopath? No. We're concerned about misgendering the shooter. USA Today wrote in a tweet, quote, "Police on Monday afternoon said that the shooter was a transgender man. Officials had initially misidentified the gender of the shooter." This is what I talked about last episode, folks, with Michael Seifert, the CEO of Public Square, right? These people, they hate your guts. Corporate America, their silence is deafening. Okay, imagine for a second, if you would, a conservative did this to a trans person, right? Again, the outrage would be never ending. The amount of GoFundMes would be up there ad nauseum. We'd be hearing about nothing but that. But when you see it, and when Christians, and even Christian children are the victim, we're not going to get involved. That's not that important. They think you're less than human at this point. They're saying it every day with their silence. And so it's why it was so important. That conversation on Monday was sort of amazing. It went super viral. I had like 1.3 million views with Michael Seifert because people are looking for an outlet. Stop supporting woke corporate America. Go check out publicsq.com. Find companies that are looking, that sign off to our patriotic values. Give them your business. Stop giving your hard-earned money to people that hate your guts. I know that Americans have been looking for an alternative. They've seen this. This is just the latest example of countless examples where these people prove that they hate your guts. They hate everything about you. So stop feeding that beast. Give your hard-earned money to people who support you. I mean, it's almost mind-boggling. So go check out publicsq.com and start supporting people who understand what we're seeing. Go check out that podcast. See for yourself, because it's, this example just keeps coming back, and every time they do it, and yet we don't change our patterns, mostly probably because we never thought there was an alternative. Like, go to publicsq.com, find patriotic businesses. Stop giving your money to the people in woke corporate and the people in the mainstream media who are literally creating this problem out of nothing, right? They're the problem. we have to support people who don't hate you. That's about as simple as it gets, folks. That's the core of the problem here, folks. Democrats, their media allies, they've convinced transgender people that they're actually facing some sort of genocide. You're at risk from genocide. And when they commit this crime, they're backing it up with the headlines we just read. Well, he was fearing for his life from genocide. Let's just say it. No one gives a shit. What we'd like is, we'd love you to stop jamming this crap down a 3-year-old's throat and saying they should be able to chop off their genitals because some teacher has been indoctrinating them. Kim Klacik said it really well last week. You notice that you don't have this transgender thing in the hood because they actually have real things to worry about? Not the insanity that some woke parent, is driving down their throats. A trans kid in Hollywood right now is like a new pair of Gucci shoes. It's the latest accessory. Even though they get honored as Women of the Year, biological men are facing some sort of genocide. You can be a biological male. You can win Women of the Year. You can be highlighted on ESPN, like I said, we spoke about earlier this week, even before we knew about this event, like Leah Thomas, the swimmer who destroyed every incredible female athlete who, a couple of months before that decided they weren't so good at being a male swimmer and became a trans. They're honored by ESPN, but they're the victim? They seem to have a level of privilege almost unparalleled in society today, as far as I am concerned. You can be trans and you can be Woman of the Year, magically displacing millions of female athletes for that position. You can have famous Hollywood celebrities like we saw a few weeks ago bowing down to Dylan Mulvaney, if we look back and we were 10 years ago, the women of the feminist movement should be outraged, but they too are silent because they're too afraid to take on the trans mafia and the privilege associated therewith. Guys, they ain't the victim in this thing, okay? They aren't the victim. They are put on a pedestal. They are a class above everyone else, and that's what they want. Every major institution in this country is starting to accept that. They're allowing them to do whatever they want. And again, they can take away everything from women. And if you're in the military, you're given special treatment if you're trans. You probably can become an admiral in about 2 minutes. They're meant, though, based on the media, like they're in a fight for their lives. I'm trying to figure out how or where. I'm trying to figure out how, if my children, their last name probably not all that easy for a lot of things like getting into college or whatever it is, understanding that they're fully blessed. Their way to get ahead, and I'm sure no one else would game this system, would be to come out as trans. Sure, no one's going to game the system and do this and take a scholarship or get into a better school or no. The coddling and the enabling of all of this is having serious and deadly consequences. Remember, it was only a couple years ago where this was deemed something that would be considered insane. It was deemed a mental health defect. But that had to change because enough of them emerged. And, woke science, woke medicine had to disregard actual science and actual medicine to accommodate. There seems to be this underlying concept in media that the shooter was driven to all of this. They were driven to it, as though there's some sort of justification for shooting up children, for shooting up Christians. There's just never any real accountability from the violence that we see from the left. Another example would be the incredible summer of love that we saw in the BLM riots of 2020. No, it's different when it's for social justice. If you don't affirm their identity, you deserve to die. And they're being led to believe that this is true, not that you can accept them, but you don't want to jam down your throats. That's not enough. That's why on Saturday, a radical group called the Trans Radical Activist Network is holding a Trans Day of Vengeance. Are you serious? Fueling more bizarre ideas about the victimhood that they're going through. Imagine any other group in society held a day of vengeance? Like after they gunned down a group of innocent kids? This is insane. This is dangerous. Guns are not the issue. The coddling, coercion, and encouragement of this nonsense against children and normalizing gender affirmation surgeries. That's the problem, folks, that we give in to each and every one of these things. That's the problem. That they'll never be satisfied with you just accepting them doing what they want to do as adults. No. You must capitulate. You must accept every single piece of never-ending and always changing drivel that comes out of their mouth, or you're a racist. You will be demonized and vilified and run through the ringer. And not just by them, but by their lackeys in the mainstream media, by the pop culture of Hollywood, by big tech. No one's talking about the pattern here. The Colorado Springs shooter, identified as non-binary. The Denver school shooter, identified as trans. The Aberdeen shooter, identified as trans. This shooter identifies as trans. There's something rotten going on in this movement. Right? No other group per capita is committing more terrorism than the trans and non-binary. According to the CDC, 0.6% of the adult population of our country, okay, identifies as trans. 0.6%. That's probably a stretch too, okay? But you add in children and stuff like that, and it's probably less. And yet, everyone in America has to cater to an extreme minority. We have to go 100% and blindly follow anything that they say. We have at least some good breaking news. Congressman Lance Gooden and Andy Noggles have sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland requesting a hate crime investigation into the shooting. The letter reads, "The shooter was a former student at Covenant School and specifically chose to terrorize this school because of their Christian faith. It is appalling that you have not yet committed to opening a hate crime investigation despite the shooter's motive being clear as day." Thank you, lawmakers. They're actually calling for a hate crime investigation because it feels like the bar for a hate crime investigation would be rather low, given that the FBI and the DOJ themselves have called concerned mothers at PTA meetings domestic terrorists for simply wanting to know what's going into their kids' education, or these days in public schools in America and others, the indoctrination of our children. You're a domestic terrorist if you don't want your children to be force-fed the woke bullshit we see coming out of these sociopaths every day. Right? But again, folks, remember, they're the victims. You shouldn't be upset. You should feel bad for them. Because they're a little afraid today that people maybe react to multiple non-binary and trans shooters shooting up places. Again, we can't talk about the mental health of it. We can't talk about the obvious insanity that we're seeing because that's not PC or woke. Guys, federal law is clear. Acts of violence based on religious affirmation are hate crimes. If a Christian did this to a Muslim school, what would happen? You think it'd be out of the news cycle a couple of days later like this has basically been? Do you think there'd be victim blaming like this is this? Do you think there'd be justification like we've seen? Like, well, no, they were driven to this. They were driven to this, so it's okay. You know, we got to make excuses or, the trans mafia is going to come after us and call us mean names. So where is the FBI? I certainly hope we can hear from them sooner or later. I mean, I know they're still busy investigating someone's grandmother who may have been within 1,500 miles of D.C. on January 6th because that's worse than Pearl Harbor and 9/11 combined in their magical, deranged, woke minds. And I saw a few tweets that I thought really made the point well, explaining how the extremists inside the trans left are violent, dangerous, and have been made to feel absolutely entitled. We've seen it. Go look in the feeds. Like, they don't even hide it anymore. They're not even like pretending. There's been a couple that have gone out and be like, listen, if you're going to commit an heinous act, at least remove your pronouns from your bio. I've seen that tweet. Okay? So not don't do it. It's okay to do it because, again, they've been made to feel entitled. There's magical acts of genocide that literally no one else in the world can see happening in America against this community. Therefore, it's okay. So again, they're not saying don't commit the violence. They're like, hey, if you're going to do it, take out your pronouns. Scrub your social media profiles. Don't give them the easy cannon fodder against the clear and developing trend of the violence, of the insanity coming from the radical factions of this movement. So to these radicals, there is no middle ground, folks. They demand your absolute subservience. They can change their mind about anything at any given time. They can step it up further, as they have, day in and day out. What was acceptable a week ago is like, well, that's right-wing extremism. If you try to stake out some sort of moderate position, nothing will ever be good enough. And perhaps that's the problem, folks. We've tried to accommodate. I've been great on this issue as far as I'm concerned. Clearly, I'm a radical right-wing lunatic to these people. I say, if you're an adult and you want to do something like this, it's fine. I don't care. If you regret it later on, that's on you. But, because I don't want a 3-year-old to be pushed into this decision and regret it later. I am evil. If you don't fully capitulate, you will be demonized. You'll be vilified. They will come after you. They will end your social standing. All of this coming from a group that the CDC says make up 0.6% of the population. Remember, folks, they're the victims, and yet they seem to have all of the power. A tiny minority of people in America, many of whom would have been diagnosed as mentally ill just a few years ago. No. They're not mentally ill anymore, folks. They're 100% in control. You must bow to them. Anytime someone on the right-leaning individual commits a horrific crime, the media, the left, immediately uses to smear all conservatives. And yet, when there's a clear epidemic of trans/non-binary mass shooters, again, a portion of the population so small that to have 4 of them in recent time seems rather significant. Now, they will say, well, there were 200 mass shootings in America. Some gang drive-by that hit 2 people. That's in that statistic. How many mass shootings do you see of children in schools by a deranged sociopath with a manifesto? So don't buy those statistics. That this is just a small group. Look at the numbers. Look at the stories. Again, we hear about how, the MAGA Republicans are the biggest threat to freedom and democracy ever. They're sociopaths. How many of them have shot up schools? And that's probably 50% of the American populace? So 0.6 can have 4 in a year, but that's not a problem. That's not a trend. The media has an entirely different reaction. Well, guys, enough is enough. We have to call this out. We have to push our federal agencies to look into these acts of terrorism and to call them just that. And if they don't, we have to vote them out of office and put enough societal pressure on them. The other movement has weaponized societal pressure for decades, and because we're good people, we go along with it, live and let live, let them have their way. But now that we've seen there is no end to the insanity, we have to push back legally, with our words, with our actions, calling them out. We cannot allow them to have this advantage of total support from the press, total support from big tech and social media. And if you post anything that's even remotely true or critical of that movement, you're going to be in virtual jail for the rest of your lives, because that's where we are. So guys, it's time to say enough is enough to the coddling of this shit. Let's call it like it is. Let's treat it like they would treat literally any other group, especially conservative group out there. Because if we don't, folks, this is just going to continue, and we've seen the results. It ain't good. No good is coming from this for America, for our children, for the next generation, and our enemies are watching and laughing their asses off as this happens in this incredible country. So, to move on, in our next story of government overreach, there's a new TikTok bill that looks like the Patriot Act in disguise. Listen, I'm no fan of TikTok, guys. I'm very clear about this, all right? TikTok is clearly a spying threat. It is owned by China, and it's been used to surveil Americans and our children, and it will be weaponized in years to come. The data that they have collected doesn't just get used in real time. It'll get used when your 13-year-old did something stupid, and 15 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, they're running for government office. It will be weaponized against them. But by the way, guys, leave it to Washington, D.C. and the scumbag bureaucrats in the swamp to make the political situation literally worse than the problem. A bill to ban TikTok called the Restrict Act and supported by the likes of Mitt Romney and Democrat Warner, so you know it's going to be a disaster, would bring more censorship to the internet. It calls for a 20-year prison sentence if you access a banned app. Check out this clip from Tucker Carlson.
Think about that for a minute. So you would be allowing the executive branch, the Biden administration, to regulate speech on the internet, and if you are somehow involved with a, quote, foreign adversary, or let's say you oppose the war against Russia, you go to prison for 20 years. So this isn't about banning TikTok. This is about introducing flat-out totalitarianism into our system. Now, just because TikTok is so unappealing, just because it's a creepy, low-IQ Chinese plot designed to make our kids trans, and it is, that does not mean that the people trying to ban TikTok have your interests in mind. Oh, it definitely doesn't, or America's. Keep in mind, these are exactly the same people who drained our strategic petroleum reserve and, in fact, promote China at every turn. Now they're telling you they're against China. They're not. This is not an effort to push back against China. It's part of a strategy to make America much more like China.
Okay, guys. And by the way, the bill, the way it's written, could end up banning much more than TikTok. The language is very broad. And as always, it has bipartisan support, because that's the quickest way to tell if something coming out of D.C. is a disaster for you. They can look at every keystroke you ever had. They can weaponize it, because the government would never weaponize these things against you like they did to anyone who's been watching for the last 6 years. The IRS targeting the people who broke the Twitter stories, the FBI raiding people who may have been within the vicinity of Washington, D.C., banks handing over records to the government without any kind of pushback so that they could find these people. None of that would happen to the people, again, who rioted, looted, burned, arson, during the Summer of Love. But, if you're a conservative, so nothing bad could possibly happen from this, folks. So while I'm no fan of TikTok, I'm also no fan of giving the government control over everything that we do, and we have to watch out for this insanity, because if this passes, the notion of freedom, the notion of privacy in anything that you do on your phone or probably anything else after that is over. Now, it's probably over anyway. I imagine they're listening to everything that we do, say, and otherwise talk about, as evidenced again by what we've seen over the last few years. But this would just get rid of even the pretense of having to do these things, in my opinion. So we got to push back. Interesting news, folks. Why does the U.S. still have troops in Syria? Just about the main topic that the Uni Party in D.C. agrees on is war. They always want it because that's their exit ramp. That's how they get rich later on. You can see that. Donald Trump, the man that was going to start World War III, is the only guy in D.C., the only politician that's been out there that's actually trying to end the endless wars. Did you guys even know that we had troops in Syria? Or Somalia, for that fact? There are roughly 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria, and several were injured last week in a drone attack by an Iranian-linked militia. An Iranian-linked militia who is the leading state sponsor of terror, a country that condones these things that we actually have still been going to for oil and gas because we can't drill on our own country, right? one contractor was killed. Who authorized this war? Doesn't seem like it was Congress. In Somalia, my father, President Trump, withdrew all of our 500 troops that were there. The Biden put them back in almost immediately. Why exactly? The problem with the forever wars like this is that we risk entering into a bigger conflict without the consent of the American people. And again, that seems to be what our government wants. That's their exit plan, that's their retirement, that's how the swamp gets rich. And it's actually one of the few things I think the American people actually agree on for the first time ever, that no one actually wants. Joe Kent is a U.S. Army veteran. He served in the Special Forces and later with the CIA. His wife was tragically killed by ISIS while she was deployed there alongside Navy SEALs. He's going to be our guest. He's going to be talking about it. And right before I go to Joe Kent, I just want to go out and talk and thank our sponsors. So I want to take the time to thank them because it takes guts to support a show like this. That's why I want to tell you about Goldco. Diversification is more important than ever. And gold and silver can protect your retirement savings from inflation and dollar devaluation. Because I've been telling you guys, there are more and more economic warning signs day in and day out, and I want you to be prepared. I want you to be diversified. I don't want you beholden to the lunatics that are making the decisions out there that we see in everything else, right? Don't assume because you think they're insane there that they're going to be making the decisions that are good for your retirement savings. You saw Joe Biden use his first veto to make sure that we can't carve out ESG BS from being considered. You know, they don't want just the best financial decision for your retirement. We got to take into account the woke talking points, even if that's not the best outcome for you. So owning tangible, physical, and inflation hedging gold and silver can help diversify your portfolio. From precious metals, IRAs, to direct purchases of gold and silver, Goldco has helped thousands of Americans diversify and protect their retirement savings. So support companies who support you instead of supporting woke companies who hate your guts. Go to donjuniorgold.com to learn more. And that's it, guys. Just learn about it. Read up on it. See if it works for you. And if you're going to go that route, do it with a company like Goldco who actually has the guts to support a show like this, clearly shares your values. So go to donjr, DONJR, gold.com, learn about it, see if it's right for you, and maybe diversify your portfolio a bit because, man, it feels like 2008 all over again, and they're desperately trying to protect the Democrats and their radical, insane decisions. But I think eventually, folks, these decisions, you have to come back and pay the piper. So don't forget about that. And don't forget about Patriot Mobile, America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Now, I understand based on my opening that would make you a terrorist threat according to the radical left. But with Patriot Mobile, you can put America first with every call, all while getting the same nationwide coverage as the major carriers. And only Patriot Mobile provides you dependable wireless service at an affordable price, but also share your values and they actually support you. Patriot Mobile puts their dollars in action, donating a portion of every dollar to support groups that fight for the First Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, another one that's going to be under threat again, not because trans lunatics, but because the inanimate object of the gun is committing atrocities, right, magically. The sanctity of life and protecting our brave police and first responders. So support the companies who support you, who share your values. Go to patriotmobile.com/DONJR. That's patriotmobile.com/DonJr. Sign up. With that, you'll get free activation. You're going to have a mobile phone anyway, guys. So you can give it to like AT&T, who's taking your hard-earned dollars and pushing their woke nonsense, canceling like, Newsmax and trying to canceling OAN, trying their best to get rid of any kind of conservative thought from their parent companies, right? Or you can give it to Patriot Mobile and have your money going to people who believe what you believe and who are actually putting that money to work for you and for the causes that you believe in. So that's patriotmobile.com/DonJr. for free activation. Check them out. I think you'll like it. Guys, we have with us a great patriot, outspoken person of the MAGA movement, incredible soldier, and unfortunately and terribly, Gold Star husband, Joe Kent. Joe was a Green Beret, served our country, served in the CIA, probably has a good understanding of a lot of what's going on right now. And Joe, before we get into like Syria and Somalia, which obviously ring near and dear, seeing as your wife was killed in Syria, right? I mean, it's strange for me. I didn't even know we were in Syria, and like I do this. Yeah. So I want to get your thoughts on sort of how we've been conducting these sort of even shadow wars and like just perpetuating the never-ending wars, even when we think we're done with all of this stuff, as well as Ukraine. But before, I spent a lot of time in my opening monologue sort of talking about the mass shooting in Nashville, and let's call it what it is, which is a domestic terrorist attack by a radicalized faction of our society. In my opinion, that's been catered to and coddled like no other. I checked, it was funny, I checked on the CDC, it's like, it's 0.6% of the population. Well, if you looked at like what the radical trans movement in terms of the power that they have, to move social media and mainstream media and big tech, like it's as though they're the most powerful group in our country, you know what I mean? Right. Tell me your thoughts on that. What is your reaction to what you're seeing, from that movement, from the left, the response? Because as someone who served our country, died for this, faced real combat, like the weaponization of these things to me is scary as hell.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's incredibly tragic and horrible anytime children are killed. Yeah. But then just to watch the media just absolutely bend over backwards to make sure they got the guy's pronouns right, the guy, the girl, whatever it is, to make sure they got the pronouns right. That was a big issue. I mean, it just really shows how radical this movement is and how the capture they have of a certain segment of our society that holds a lot of power. And I really think you're seeing radicalization, you're seeing the exact same things. I mean, we're called domestic terrorists all the time.
Yeah, because I own guns, and therefore, I'm like, I've never killed anyone. Like, this guy, girl, whatever, biological female that goes by he, him, that person was like, well, they're the victim. Yeah. He was driven to this. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, he was driven to this. Like, if it was a MAGA guy, like, when these things happen, they're just like, please God. They're not really praying to God, but they're praying to the Satan or whoever these leftists actually worship. Please, Satan, let it be a guy in a MAGA hat. And the second it isn't, it's out of the news. We don't really want that outcome, so let's just bury this. Like it's basically out of the news already.
Right.
I didn't see the FBI calling it a terror threat or domestic terrorism. The DOJ, they'll call you that. Right. Like after serving your country nobly for years, losing your wife to ISIS, to actual terrorism. How do you deal with that?
I mean, obviously it's incredibly frustrating, but I mean, for me, it's just looking at all these different indicators of this is a radicalized terrorist group, and yet at the same time, we still have the corporate media and so much of our society that is either too scared to actually address that, or they're going along with it. I think there's a huge component here too. We've been told that, especially in my state, in Washington State, we're told that these kids that are going through some sort of an identity crisis, they need gender-affirming care. They need to be given these pharmaceutical drugs to alter their composition, or they need the surgery. We're told they absolutely need that, and then when something like this happens, we can't even say so how much testosterone was actually in her body? What chemical concoction was taking place that was pushed into her by the pharmaceutical industry? Like, we can't even ask those questions. It's automatically like, just be quiet, you can't talk about this, let's blame the guns.
The inanimate object. I mean, I have dozens of guns, and it's like not one of them has ever discharged on its own. It's almost shocking. And the fact that you can't even ask the question is like, hey, could this be a problem? Meaning, like, our medical institutions up until like a few years ago called what we're seeing now is totally normal. Like, they called it a mental illness. Now, woke culture made us go away from that. We can't do it. That doesn't mean it isn't actually so. Just like everything we were told about COVID, like, that went against common sense. Everything that we were told about the vaccine that went against common sense, or that went against the actual statistics that we were seeing manifest in real time. Like, there's science, and then there's like what's socially acceptable science by the media today, and that's the difference. So the fact that you can't even ask the question, like, jacking up a woman with all sorts of testosterone,
because women don't normally go out and kill people. I mean, this is by and large, if you're gonna profile, this is by and large something that men do. I mean, this is not natural for a woman to do.
Correct. It was like one of few, and it was like that was the interesting part. Like I kind of crapped on like the New York Times for that because they were like, well, I was like, wait. Well, I mean, now that it's a mass thing and you can make it unique, now it's she. If I called her she, I'm a terrible human being. I'm a demon for not acknowledging their pronouns that they can arbitrarily kind of flip-flop back and forth.
Yeah. And then they had to go back. I think it was New York Times that actually went back and was like, well, actually, identified as. They had to go back and
they're making it up as they go.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, I don't know. And that's sort of was the point of my monologue. Like, I'm actually, quite let's call it progressive on the issue. Like if you're 25 and you want to, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Guess what? If you regret it, that's on you. You made that decision. That's fine.
Yeah.
When they're jamming it down our 3-year-olds' throats,
Yes.
it's a whole different thing. And if we don't think that kids are impressionable. And that's probably part of the plan, which makes it more evil to me, right? Like, and at this point, like, I don't care. I'm going to get criticized. And I know trans people. I'm friendly with some. And again, when you do it as an adult, and that's fine, they're actually, pretty, jamming these kids down our throats, doing it this way in a manner that wants to carve out parents from the decision-making process, that thinks that's terrible, to allow some, rainbow-haired freak teacher do this, to be able, doctors administer it without consent. Like, there's no other word for it than evil at this point. And I think we just actually have to say that.
Yeah. It's just absolutely evil. These are, I think, really big, scary, dark forces that are at work in our society for a wide variety of reasons. And we actually have to take action to stop that. And I think that the most clear-cut thing that we can do is actually defend our children, not just like say, hey.
What? That's so radical. That's so radical, Joe.
Like treat our kids maybe like we treat a bank or something, like, and put an armed guard outside the school.
Well, but that's what's crazy about this whole story, and like the thing that's left out is like, it's known that the shooter targeted the school because it was a soft target.
Yeah.
Like they had two other options. They're like, well, that one had armed guards. Like, clearly that decision-making process drives it much further into the hate crime territory, which it obviously was anyway. Like it shot Christian kids. Like I think someone said that he said something like, you go after our kids, we'll kill your kids. Like, kind of a big deal. And it's weird that we haven't seen the manifesto. These things usually get released, but I have a feeling that what's in the manifesto probably only shows it was more radical. I then see people on the left be like, if you're going to do and commit a heinous act of crime, like scrub your social media. Like I'm like, wait. You're not saying don't do it.
Yeah.
And that's the point. They feel emboldened and empowered to even do this. Like they don't even think it's wrong.
Yeah.
And they're saying it out loud in public.
Yep.
Like, and they feel they can go to their job and not face any consequence. They can live in polite society and not. They're saying these things. It's like, wait, you want them to scrub their pronouns so as not to put more pressure on the trans community? Like you're the victim. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
Just don't put more pressure on this deranged. It's
absolutely insanity.
Insane.
And literally, it's the exact same thing that terrorists do overseas. We just have been lucky we haven't seen that much of it here in America, but now you have this group that really, really believes in this ideology, and they will take any action necessary to further their agenda.
I'll take it a step further. Like, and again, I'm sure it's happened and they've done terrible things to children, but like, you don't see like a flagrant targeting of children nearly as much as just, an adult, like this was a targeting of 9-year-olds. There were other victims in the way that they were terrible, but a targeting of Christians, yes, you certainly see that. But like even some of the most sociopathic terrorists in the country don't be like, okay, we're just gonna go target the children.
Shoot the kids,
like you know what I mean? They're going after the people that could perhaps be like. That's what, again, it's all deranged, but it makes it even a little bit.
Yeah, they're going to
sicker.
New levels of evil for sure.
So what do you understand how this works? You've dealt with actual terrorists.
Yeah.
How do you stop this?
Well, first and foremost, you put armed guards outside the schools. This shouldn't be that hard. I mean, in pretty much every study you look at of active shooter scenarios, the second the shooter is confronted by a threat, they either surrender, kill themselves, or they're gunned down. And so for us to not actually put armed guards outside of our schools, and look, I'm a big states' rights guy. I don't want the federal government to try and solve every single problem.
Although Washington, I'm like, I don't know.
But at this point, like, hey, if we have federal air marshals, why don't we have federal school marshals? We just hired 87,000 IRS agents, right? We just sent $120 billion to Ukraine.
Yeah, by the way, with that money, you could put, I think it's like, the statistics were like, you could put 3 armed, like well-trained and armed guards in these schools. That's before perhaps even training teachers or arming, again, there's plenty of teachers that I don't know that I'd want defending my children because they have no business Meaning they wouldn't
Right.
put in the effort to learn how to handle a gun. I think it's great if they want to protect themselves and whatever, but like, I do think they'd need some sort of level of training before I'd want a gun in a classroom with,
Right.
with kids. But there's plenty of teachers that would be totally capable of that. There'd be plenty of teachers that would want to do that and would go for the training.
Absolutely.
And if we took the money we're wasting on corrupt regimes in Ukraine, we could easily do that.
Yeah, or ended a war in Syria or Somalia. I mean, we have the resources to do this, and really governments and societies, they prioritize what's important to them. And if you just take a broader look, it's like we are not putting any prioritization whatsoever on defending our most vulnerable. And I think that that's just absolutely sick and wrong.
Well, again, if it was a Muslim school,
Yeah.
I think you'd see. Well, we should
think you
protect
would.
that community, not any kids,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's almost like, well, it's Christians, like, bah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
just and it
Yeah,
doesn't,
exactly.
you know, like they're looked at like the dregs of society. I mean that's where we are, and like I don't say that lightly. I say that like, you know, I guess I'm doing this stuff
Yeah.
for a reason. Like it was a lot easier to be a real estate developer from New York,
Yeah.
and you know, but it's like, holy shit, we have to leave our kids a country that they recognize and that.
Yeah.
And right now,
It's not it. No.
it's not. I mean, so talk about. I mean, how did you served your country? You lost your wife to terrorism. You did all this. You know, what's driving you to continue in this fight? Especially, you know, just understanding that, guys, Joe, it's Washington State. Like this is, like,
It's a tough fight.
it's a tough fight in the sense that, listen, there's incredible people. And I know people in the, you know, in the mountainside and the sort of,
Yeah.
you know, off of the coast that are just, you know, salt of the earth, great patriotic Americans. I imagine those are the people that are voting for you. But it's so counterbalanced by the insanity. I mean, between Seattle and this, I mean, it's leading the charge, you know, of some of that. What makes you, what motivates you to keep doing this, especially understanding how stacked that is against you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I always wanted to serve my country. Grew up very patriotic, enlisted in the Army, did 20 years, 11 combat deployments, because I really believed in fighting for the nation. If someone's going to go and put their lives on the line, I felt that I should be one of those people. So did my late wife. But really just what's happened, I think, in the last couple of years, the way that we've been losing our country, the way that our ruling class, I mean, your dad hit the nail on the head when he first started running for president. Our ruling class has forgotten about the American people. I mean, from the endless wars overseas to shipping to manufacturing overseas, and those are the bigger picture things. But now we're just seeing this absolute evil ideology take over every single aspect of our country, targeting Christians, sexualizing our children. And, you know, I'm just not going to sit there and let my country get taken down the tubes, because really at the end of the day, my kids they're 5 and they're 7 now. They were 1 and 3 when their mom was killed. And I'm going to have to explain to them, hey, she gave her life for this country, and because it was worth it, because this country is worth fighting and dying for. And if we keep going in the direction we're going right now, I'm afraid they won't believe me. Like, that's one of the biggest fears that I have. So it's like I have to fight to at least give them the country I grew up in.
Yeah, it's sort of like, you know, the older I get, the better I was, right? We're looking back on a country that doesn't seem to exist anymore, and that's, I
Right.
guess we're still fighting to preserve that, and but that's why we also need real fighters. It's why we need people who are willing, you know, to step up. I mean, I've heard the story. I mean, tell me how, if you don't mind, how you sort of first got into even the idea of this. I think it was actually meeting
It was
my father
It really was
in really shitty circumstances.
Yeah, so Shannon, my late wife, she was killed in Syria a month after President Trump ordered our troops to withdraw. And he did that for a very specific reason, because we had defeated all the ground that ISIS held, and that was what he ran on.
Yeah.
That was the mandate the American people gave him. And so President Trump did something, I think, very unique, whereas you have all these different politicians who they run on this and they run on that, and then when push comes to shove, they just go to the status
They tell you what you want to hear, and then we don't really want to do that. You know,
Right,
like,
yeah.
we're going to be tough on China, but wow, my donor wants a widget a little bit cheaper. Like, let's not be that tough.
Yeah,
You
we're
know?
not really going to end the wars.
Yeah.
Because Obama talked about ending the wars, but anyways, we took out all the ground that ISIS controlled in December of 2018, and that's when President Trump famously said, "Let's get our troops out of there." Secretary of Defense Mattis, a bunch of other unelected bureaucrats, actively worked against President Trump. And now I had just finished out my 20-year career in the Army and Special Forces, switched over to the CIA, and my last couple of years in the Trump administration, it was a night and day difference from the Obama administration. There was real threats out there. President Trump enabled us to go out and actually crush the enemy. But at the same time, we had these unelected bureaucrats who had no qualms about bad-mouthing the commander-in-chief, which I had never seen before.
Or slow playing the order,
Slow
right? Like, we
playing.
don't really have to listen to that. If we can wait it out,
we're
well.
not going to listen to those guys.
And I hear that a lot. I hear it from like my friends in the teams. They're like,
Yeah.
I was like, well, how'd you take out the caliphate? It's like, they just let us do what we did best.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't have to phone into it. Like, we have a high-value target, you know, one of the playing cards. Like, we got them in our sights. Like, you just had the authority to go, as opposed to like, waiting with a 12-hour time difference and calling some bureaucrat sitting in a nice air-conditioned office in D.C. He's at home at 5 o'clock for dinner with his kids, and you got to wait. And then something changes in the scenario, you can no longer go in. I mean, I hear that over and over again. Like, the solution was actually so simple. If the average American understood how obvious it was, and like how flagrantly that obvious solution is just totally disregarded by military brass and the bureaucrats, you'd be disgusted.
The goal, I mean, my experience in the war on terror, I really eventually learned that the goal was not for us to actually like win or accomplish our mission. It was just to stay there. And we're seeing that play out right now.
Yeah.
But after President Trump gave the order to get our troops out, that's what
Follow the money.
Follow the money. I mean, we had all these bureaucrats turn against Trump, and then a month later, my wife and 3 other Americans were killed by a suicide bomber in Manbij, Syria, a place where we had no business being, there's still bad people there. But
but there's no strategic, there's no,
there's
like,
none.
nothing.
There's none, exactly. And so I was furious. I was actually overseas as well on an assignment. I flew back. My first day back in America was at Dover, where I was waiting to receive my late wife's body. And some aide or whoever came by and they said, the president's going to be here and he'll meet with the families of the fallen at the lake. And I said, yeah, I'd love to meet President Trump. I was a early on Trump supporter. The second that he went after Jeb Bush on the debate stage, I was like somehow the guy from The Apprentice understands foreign policy better than any of these guys. So I'm all in. So I just really wanted the opportunity. If I figured that I wasn't going to actually get to meet President Trump. I thought I'd get to like shake his hand and there'd be a bunch of handlers there. Yeah. But I ended up in a room kind of like this. It was just me and President Trump for about 10 minutes, and he was very gracious, very compassionate. Aside of the President Trump, the media never lets you see, because he's your father.
Well, but part of that, I'll say, is his fault. Because I'm like, he actually has that side, but he doesn't like the show.
Yeah.
He perceives it. It's like the old school mentality of like, it's, that's weakness. I can't then go deal with Xi or Kim Jong Un or whatever, whoever it is. Like, I'm like, that may be his only like political liability. It's like he has that thing that some people want to see at certain times. He does it, but unlike every other politician in the world, like he won't even. I don't want to say capitalize. I guess it sounds terrible, but that's the reality. Like it's and he doesn't want to ever show that side.
Yeah. So, but he was very compassionate, and I tell people that, and they look at me like shocked. I'm like, he's a human being. The guy wasn't a politician for very long.
Who are you, and what have you done with President Trump?
Yeah, exactly. But I had the opportunity. I just said, "Hey, Mr. President, I don't know if you know who I am." I had my hair like kind of down to my shoulders at the time, and I was.
Well, you were in the CIA, right?
So you were just. And I was like, "Hey, I've been fighting these wars for as long as they've been going on, and your gut instincts, you're getting it right, but you're being undermined in a way that I've just never seen before." And I think he knew that at that point because he had just fired Secretary of Defense Mattis and all that. And so I thought, hey, I got it off my chest. I resigned from the agency to focus on my kids. But I got a call a little bit later on from one of Trump's national security folks that said, hey, we don't really know what you told the president, but he liked it. Will you come back out to D.C. and chat with us? And so I did some, I'd say, unofficial advisory work, national security, Middle East type of stuff. And then the 2020 campaign was kicking off, and so I helped out with as much as I possibly could with Veterans for Trump, Military Families for Trump, just to really try and articulate how common sense, but actually just strategically genius President Trump's foreign policy was.
Yeah. Listen, it actually... he dealt with a lot of stuff, obviously, as president, and I didn't even bother him most of the time because if I even showed up at the White House, there's FOIA. Were you discussing business? It's like, well, I don't know. Hunter's making billions. It's fine. I was like, no, but he actually he brought up the story. He made a pretty real concerted effort to go there for whenever those kinds of incidences happen. I mean, I know he left a primary kickoff event in New Hampshire. He's like, I just got to go. I got to cut my speech short. There's 13,000 people waiting for him to speak. He's like. I got to get back, and it was a different event. This was later. He always went there, but I remember him telling me the story. He's like, I met this guy, and he was like, he literally, it's typical DJT. He was like, it was like typecasting, but we need Americans like this to talk about what's really going on. And he was like, this guy's got to run for office, and he was talking about you. I didn't even, I didn't even put two and two together in a while. But then I saw you guys, and I was like, oh my God, that was the story. Yeah, because it's unusual. He's got so much going on. I didn't even want to. He's not a small talk kind of guy usually, even with us. And so it was it was unique that he told that story, but you made a real impression on him on what was really going on and what was, not just going on in the wars, but what could be done and what's being undermined. And, that's what's, I think, scary for so many people. I don't think the average American understands just how how easy it is for the machine to sort of just
Oh, yeah.
decide what's going to happen. You know, the most powerful man in the world. It's bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
100%.
there's so many 90 levels, and
Yeah.
well, we'll just slow play it. Like, Trump will be gone, and you know, whether it's 4 years or 8 years or whatever, he'll be out, and you know, we still need to be, you know, making money from the machine, and you know, getting our board seat at Raytheon, and we're not going to do that if we're not selling missiles to the, you know, the bad guys, the good guys, to everyone, and you know, talk about it. Take that further, because I mean, you've probably seen it more than anyone.
Yeah.
Just the bad decisions that are made, because that's the retirement plan of that individual. You know, so they're making decisions purely, you know, they're serving their country, but it's like they're not. Like they're actually doing a major disservice to our country by prolonging the stuff, because that's their exit ramp.
You know, I think a lot of it creeps in slowly. I mean, if you spend 20 plus years in the military and you're continuing to get promoted based on these wars going on, especially post 9/11, the last thing you're going to do is say, hey, we should kill off this vehicle that has allowed me to be promoted and to continue to ply my trade. And a lot of times that just gets very, very blurred with what's actually best for the country. And again, that's back to what really, I think, resonated with so many warfighters with President Trump, was he was just like, hey, what did we actually get out of this? Like, what we invaded Iraq, we're still in Afghanistan. What are we actually getting here? And I think that's the most common sense question that we always should ask ourselves. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And we're really seeing this play out right now in a horrible way with the war in Ukraine, with continuing to keep our troops in Syria. I mean, there's so many cash cows. Iraq's a massive cash cow. They're the ones that are basically controlled by Iran. We handed that whole government over to Iran really, really early on in the fight. And now we are funding the Iraqi government, who is funding the Iranian militias who are killing Americans. And the thing is, nobody, you want to talk about a big lie, I say this all the time, nobody wants to say, you know what, we're getting screwed here in Iraq. That's our biggest embassy we have. Like, the embassy that we have in Iraq is this massive college campus on the banks of the Tigris that gets rocketed every now and again by our so-called allies.
Minor details.
Minor details.
Let's keep giving them missiles. What could go wrong?
Exactly. Let's give them tanks. I mean, I was over there when we gave them tanks, and then we were afraid they were going to use the tanks against the embassy. And it was just like, this whole thing is one big self-licking ice cream cone, because there's nobody wants to mess with, hey, we're going to continue to give these different governments aid. And then we're potentially going to provide warfighters into these locations, and that just continues to keep the machinery oiled. And if you speak out against that, they will turn against you. In this current state, they'll call you a Putin supporter. But
yeah, you're a Russia apologist for being like, you mean we're going to give 130 billion to like a country rated more corrupt than Russia itself? And again, like no accounting of where the weapons are going. I saw that. Maybe the best example of it, which to your point about Iran, was like I saw that when they bombed Soleimani.
Yeah.
In Iraq, like plotting to take over our embassy, a guy that literally designed the IED programs, you know, the improvised explosive device programs for Iran, used probably in Afghanistan, but certainly in Iraq, against our troops. Like, that's like as bad as it gets as an outside actor. And we put a Hellfire missile through his car, and like there was outrage from like army. I'm like, wait a minute, like this guy's been killing American soldiers de facto. He designed the weapons that are doing. He's supplying them to the enemies or installing them himself, in the sense that, you know, having teams of people do this, like killing and maiming thousands of Americans, like beyond, you know, even the psychological trauma of not knowing if every step you take is going to be your last, right? Like, and it's like you're upset that we did this, like, well, you're invading counter. I'm like, I don't know, man. But
a couple months before, they wanted President Trump to go to war with Iran itself because a drone got shot down. So it's always like, what's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck? If you get too surgical and you fight too smart, they get really mad at you. So like President Trump was like, hey, if you kill an American, we will hit you back where it hurts.
Because the cost of one Hellfire missile, you know, is not nearly enough for the retirement programs of hundreds of deep state, you know, generals and or like, you know, no, we got to go full war. Like, if we're going to do, don't just take out the bad guy and take out their capabilities of continuing these things, and reverse the sort of the mentality, which is like, you know, I don't want to be walking around. I love that, you know, my father told me the story about, I guess he was at Camp David, and when the Taliban was, you know, strangely quiet for a while after this and not doing anything, it's because he literally goes up to the Taliban later and be like, here's a picture of your house. It's like, well, why are you showing me a picture of your house? It's like,
they'll figure it out.
I think you understand. Like, I don't have to explain further. We just like we have a picture of your house from like my dad's telling me this. I'm like, that's like amazing. Like, and so consequently, for 2 years after that, not a single U.S. soldier killed by it, because they're like, you know what?
Yeah, exactly.
I like my house.
Yeah.
I don't need a missile coming through our house. But again, the notion of full scale, like, we're going to be in Ukraine until it ends. I'm like,
maneuver warfare, like all this nonsense. The funny thing is, you really see this play out, obviously in the Trump administration, but even under the Biden administration. We killed Ayman Zawahiri, the number 2 in Al Qaeda, the guy that actually was responsible for planning some of 9/11. After we had no presence whatsoever in Afghanistan, through intelligence means, we were able to track that guy down and kill him with a Hellfire. And the Biden administration took 0 victory laps. The military-industrial complex, 0 victory laps. All you hear from them is, we need to get back into Afghanistan. You're like, well, what do we need to go back to Afghanistan for? If the mission was counterterrorism, we just killed this guy without an embassy and without a massive military footprint there. Don't you think you should be taking a victory lap on that?
20 years we withdraw, and there's no victory lap for anything we actually accomplished.
No.
Right? I mean, that's what's terrible about it for me, right? There was the withdrawal itself. I mean, and talk about it, because you've been in these parts of the world, and like the withdrawal, I'm watching, we're shocked and dismayed. Remember this one?
Yeah.
That the Taliban didn't install a more diverse and inclusive government. I mean, this was our Secretary of State. Like you're worried about installing a diverse. You've been fighting the Taliban for 20 years. You think they give a fuck about like a diverse and inclusive? Like what have you been? Like, you're not a serious person.
Like, spoiler alert, they're not sending any little girls.
Millie, getting up there like, we couldn't see this coming. I'm like, listen. And again, I've not served. I'll be very clear about this. But like, I saw it coming. Like, you don't have to. Like, that's not a stretch. I tell the story. I think it was my son Spencer. He was 9, I think at the time, maybe 8, when the withdrawal happened. I think he was 9. And I picked him up from school, and he just goes like, "Hey, Dad, why did we pull out our military before the civilians?" I don't. And he's like legit. He's a 9-year-old kid. I was doing like picking him up from school. We're gonna go do father-son dinner, maybe a little fishing at one of our golf courses, and like he's asking me these real questions, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's clear as day to a 9-year-old. Dad, why did we leave $86 billion in equipment to the Taliban? Aren't they terrorists, Dad? And I'm like, yeah. And I was like, I couldn't. He looked at me like I was stupid, because I was like, I couldn't give him an answer other than because these people are idiots.
Yes.
Like that. He didn't use the word biometric, but this one was the one that got me when they were like, well, he was like, they gave him like the machines that can tell you who the person is. I was like, he goes like, why would we give our enemy a way for them to be able to tell who helped us for 20 years against them? I go, oh my God, we're being led by imbeciles.
Yeah.
Imbeciles. And there's literally no other conclusion.
Yeah.
Right? You couldn't see it coming. Like anyone I know that served there saw it coming. It was clear as day. They needed to accelerate the timeline to the summer when they're fighting, not the winter when they're hiding in caves. Like, just to be able to be like, we did it faster than Trump. Because I'm no advocate for the endless wars.
Right.
But there's a way to do it that doesn't just like,
you don't just hand the whole thing over.
You don't kill 13 soldiers. You don't, and then you don't, the guys that couldn't see it coming after 20 years in theater, within 6 hours were like, we got the guys that did it.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, you could get the ISIS or whoever it was, Taliban terrorists that killed 13 soldiers in like 6 hours. Yeah, we got them with a missile strike. Wait, you had the intelligence capabilities of doing that, but you didn't see it coming?
Yeah.
After 20 years? I'm like, so I was like, I'm going to go out there and call bullshit. Yeah, and that's 100%. Risky. I've done this a couple times and it's worked out pretty well. Like Jussie Smollett, I was like, I'm calling bullshit. You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, you're a terrorist. I was like, I don't know, man. It sounds like, just the fact pattern doesn't make any sense, and we're not allowed to do that. We must just believe the gospel. So it's like, I'm calling bullshit. Yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, we drowned a family going to a barbecue. Like, exactly. With the spinning blade missile that just decapitates anyone within I'm like, yeah, because of course the people that didn't see the whole thing coming, that had the shot at the terrorist at the time, I guess we're learning now, that didn't take it. Allowed these Americans to be killed. Like, of course that guy isn't doing that. Yeah. Like, if you can't take out the terrorists then in the act when of course you didn't find who committed it 6 hours later and put a missile through their heads. Like, that was never going to happen.
No. I mean, the whole thing with the Afghan withdrawal, I think it just really, it speaks to the military-industrial complex, but then also just how the Biden administration operates, I think, like at the lethal confluence of like hubris and incompetence. So like, it's like,
yeah, in the grand scheme of the
grand-
Matrix,
they're
that's a
like-
really
they're
shitty.
right
That's
there.
a really bad cross section.
yeah. I mean, because under President Trump, like you said, he went and he handed the Taliban that piece of paper that says, "I know exactly where you live. If you screw with us, we are going to come for you." At the time, our goal was to fight the Taliban at the negotiating table. It worked out successfully, like you said. We had about a year and a half where no Americans were killed by the Taliban. And that's when President Trump wanted to actually have a good planned withdrawal. There was some, the debate back in there, but like, were we going to leave some people? Were we not? But then what happened was immediately we had the Russian bounties hoax that came up. We had a bunch of people that were still in the intelligence community, probably are still there to this day, went to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and said like, Putin's placed bounties on the heads of American soldiers, and if Trump leaves now, well, somehow he'll be Putin's pawn. And the Russia hoax was still going on then.
Well, it wasn't. It was disproven, but it didn't matter because it could be disproven, but it's like we'll still run with it. I mean, there's still people today talking about how that was real, even though there's like the same people who won't talk about like, do you think maybe Biden's making decisions in Ukraine/Russia right now because his son was on every payroll imaginable?
Yeah.
Are we? I mean, clearly the softest we've ever been on China by like a long shot. Like, is that a factor of the fact that the Chinese government, had an incredible investment of $1 billion into Hunter's fund because, the Chinese government invests lots of billion-dollar investments with crackheads.
With crackheads who
shit. Like, I wouldn't get $1 billion from China because I'm not nearly a competent crackhead, enough.
You gotta work on your art career.
Sure, they're smart. They're smart people. They give money to crackheads. It's what could go wrong?
Yeah. But it's crazy because after the Russian bounties thing comes out, Congress then moves heaven and earth. That's the only time Congress seems to be able to move in unison is to keep troops at war, and they block Trump from being able to spend any money to get our troops out. And so Trump actually negotiates and extends the ceasefire even further into May of 2020. We all know what happens next. The election gets stolen and Biden gets installed. But Biden can't keep the original deal. He says, no, we're not leaving in May. We're going to leave on September 11th. And that's when the Taliban says, oh, no deal, Jack. And I think that what the military-industrial complex did, Milley and Austin, because these guys, they know Biden. They know that Biden was supposed to get us out of Afghanistan under Obama. And so I think that they thought that they could keep lying to Biden and that Biden would approve one more troop extension. Because that's kind of how the war on terror has gone for the last 20 years. It's been one extension after the next. The next guy's always going to get us out.
Talk about that a little bit. I mean, that's sort of, and that's just, again, a money game.
Yeah, I mean, really it is. I mean, because I think the DOD, the military, does a great job of going to Congress and going to politicians and saying, "Look, man, if you pull us out now, the terrorists are going to come attack us here, and you don't want to be that guy."
Yeah,
and most of them are like,
it's just easier to be like,
no further questions, rubber stamp. And I think you get an actual critical thinker in there, like President Trump, who's like, "Yeah, explain that to me." And it collapses, and Trump says, okay, no, we're actually going to go ahead and get these guys out of there. But Biden comes in, and he wants to be the guy that gets them out on September 11th, finally. And I think his political team was, again, they were devious enough and at the same time incompetent enough. They were like, September 11th, no matter what, everyone's coming out. And I think Milley and a lot of these guys, because look, I don't like a lot of what they do, but they can plan a withdrawal if they want to.
Yeah, of course. It's not rocket science.
They chose not to plan it. They let the State Department doesn't plan massive logistical operations. That's the military's deal.
Well, the State Department was the guy. Yeah. I mean, that was the guy who got up on stage in front of Congress. We're shocked that they didn't put a trans, a more diverse and inclusive government in. Like, I'm like, wait a minute. Did you think there was going to be they're not going to throw gays off buildings anymore. They're going to give them a seat at the table. They're going to bring Leah Thomas in, trans swimmer extraordinaire, to talk about the you see it today. You saw what was it? The hashtag campaign last week, in Afghanistan, we're going to help. Yeah. I'm like, a hashtag campaign on Twitter. I'm like, it's less than 10% internet connectivity. What is your woke virtue signaling going to possibly do over there? Someone told me this, and it actually had to do with conservation issues, sort of in Africa, and because I'm a big hunter, and they're like, you can't solve third world problems with first world solutions. And people don't understand that. Exactly. You can't get someone who lives in America, even, in sort of, let's call it, the lap of privilege, just being in this country relative to probably anywhere else in the world, even still, almost irrespective of socioeconomic status, relative to the world. You can't get that person to understand what it's really like there until they've actually experienced it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I think the State Department has massive issues, but that's one of their big things is they become this social experiment vehicle as opposed to what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be diplomats pursuing U.S. interests abroad, but instead, after 20 years of war, we're told that, hey, we need to go hand out soccer balls and teach little girls and send little girls to school and further LGBTQ whatever rights in the third world. And so then, and then
No, they'll take our money for it because we'll fund that shit to like,
100%.
oh yeah, millions of dollars for this?
Gender
Sure.
in Pakistan, like that
Yeah.
all literally went probably right to the ISI and then some money laundering, throughout the American political scene. But yeah, that's the machinery. And again, like when people are like, hey, why did they hate Trump so much? Was it the mean tweets? If you go and you say that you're going to end the war machine and you're actually going to go to war with the military-industrial complex, like they are going to come after you with everything they have.
The swamp is deep, but the swamp also has teeth. Right, like that, and that's sort of what perhaps was naive for me. It's like I believed that all these people, like, hey, they actually love our zero, almost zero. And I'm not saying there aren't people that do.
Yeah.
But these days, like if you are a patriot, if you respected Trump and liked what he was doing, like, well, that was it. You just weren't going to get a promotion.
Yeah.
You weren't going to do. Talk about sort of the woke takeover.
Yeah.
Of these institutions. It's been explained to me, like, I was like, how do these generals go? How do you spend like 40 years in the army and like you really want to learn about white rage that no one had ever heard of before? Like, and someone explained it to me, which is like, because there isn't really a desire for war across the country, while there may be in DC, left and right can generally agree on this. Ukraine may be the one that they've sort of marketed into this. You must see, when I'm up at my cabin in New York and I drive back to the city, it's like, I see hundreds of Ukraine flags on cars, not a single American flag, minor details. But like the exit ramp is now actually going to work in corporate America for these generals. And if you're the woke general, it's like, well, Disney gets general credit, but it's the woke general, so it's okay. They actually believe the bullshit we're going to, indoctrinate your children with. And I was like, oh my God, that's probably actually it, because it's the only logical answer for why these guys would go with any of this crap.
I think, the corporate off-ramp, it definitely factors in a very big way. But if you want to survive in Washington, D.C., whether you're in the DOD, the State Department, the intelligence community, and you want to continue to get promoted, you do need to be with, I would say, permanent Washington, D.C., which is very, very left-leaning. And that you think that, hey, the experts should run absolutely everything. And expert culture has now become, the expert, big air quotes there.
Listen, you should be like,
Not
they
based
should
on track
revoke,
record.
not based on track record, not based on any sort of reasonable success, but like, they should have, like, you should revoke expert status. If you're wrong for decades, I always use the example with my father when they were like, well, Trump's doing it all wrong with North Korea. I'm like, well, why?
Exactly.
And they're like, well, because we've been in charge of the delegation from regarding North Korea for 25 years. I go, well, so have you met like the other side? No. I was well, like, so why would I believe that you're doing anything? Like you've been doing it for 25 decades.
Yes.
Decades, and you've not even been in the room.
Yeah.
You're so. Doing the same thing over, Einstein's definition of insanity, right? The same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I'm like, I don't know, like, why should you be an expert? Like, you should lose that status after a couple errors.
Yeah, same thing with the Abraham Accords was a great example of that as well. You had all the...
It can't be done!
You can't negotiate a separate peace, John Kerry out there, and it's like, no, actually, we just did,
like 5 times. And
because we talked to all these guys, and they actually agree on, like, a lot of the big issues. Like, if you had spent any time in the Middle East, I spent a lot of time there, that was the common sense solution. Like, nobody on the ground was getting hung up on, like, the Palestine issue. But that's the big thing in Washington, D.C. If you can parrot these woke talking points, regardless of how competent you are at your job, there will always be a next rung for you to climb, because you'll be seen either as an ally or a crusader, however you want to label it, for these causes. And so that's who we've promoted. And also, we just haven't ever, like you said with the expert thing, we haven't cracked down on any of the people who have not just failed but lied. There's a lot of folks in the senior levels of the DOD. They lied to the Bush administration. The Bush administration had horrible leadership. Same with Obama. But these guys lied, and that's a big thing. That all came crumbling down with the Afghan withdrawal, because just before that, you had Milley and a bunch of the other generals out there saying, oh, the Afghan military, we spent 20 years here. We spent billions of dollars.
They're ready.
This is a professional fighting force. And then, boof, it all just disappears overnight.
And listen, while there were some great soldiers, I'm sure, as a whole, everyone I know that's been over there were like, man, like that was never going to happen. Like they were never going to, like half of them are working for the other side and they're just happy to be armed by us and take our equipment. but like we never even heard those stories.
We never did. And there was never any reckoning. The same thing happened in Iraq. We pulled out of Iraq in 2011. We patted ourselves in the back. We said that we built this great, this great government. Democracy. And then the first time they're actually challenged, ISIS steals a bunch of rusty AKs and Soviet equipment from Assad. They roll across the berm. The $1 trillion Iraqi army throws all their gear on the ground and hightails it. And we have to go back and reinvade the country all over again, essentially. So it's like, but these people, they continue to be rewarded, and then all they do is say like, well, I want to understand white rage. And that's like their get out of jail free card, because they say enough woke crap and they tell the Washington Post and New York Times what they want to hear.
So how do you end that? Because it feels like there's clearly none of that could ever end up being like a positive thing for our country. You can be whatever, but like, what does it have to do with war? What does it have to do with getting out of it? Obviously money is driving that appetite for some of these things, but like, can you do it and actually win? Like, how do you end it?
Well, I think really just getting back to the Constitution, like Congress should be the ones that approve war. This is why like what Matt Gaetz is doing with getting the different votes forced on AUMF, I think is very, very essential. Because right now, the question that every American should have, like whether they read a lot about the world and war, is, hey, what's our vital national security interest?
Correct.
If we're going to war somewhere or we're going to give military aid somewhere, and it can't be explained to your average American who's busy and got 100 different things going on, like why we need to do it in like 30 seconds, then we probably don't need to be there in the first place.
Well, yeah, Matt was on this show like 3 weeks ago, and it was like I guess it was the Monday before the Wednesday of the vote.
Yeah.
And I want to like talk about it because it's like I said, I do this.
Yeah.
Like I speak with congressmen and guys running, and like politics. It's like sort of become my life, and it's like, wait, we have people in Syria?
Yeah.
Like, and he's like, yeah, and like they're just there and not authorized by Congress, and he puts up this bill to like try to get. And Congress was like, no, we don't want to touch that. Like, the bill didn't even pass. Like, Republicans and Democrats, it's like, we're going to let these other people decide. Mm-hmm. It's just such a flagrant slap in the face to what I think the American general public, and like I said, I didn't even know about it. And they're not going to talk about it because they know it's not popular.
Exactly.
But they're going to perpetuate. Same with Somalia.
I think a big thing, too, to really right the ship would be to hold a lot of these people accountable. And the American people, they remember what happened in Afghanistan. They might not remember the 20 years war. They might not remember why we went. But when we lost those 13 on the way out and the way that we exited from Afghanistan, the American people remember that. Yeah. And we've still held no one accountable. I mean,
people should be in jail for that. And by the way, I think, like, again, if you say something that's deemed, offensive by, the arbiters of truth in the, lunatic communist media, like, there's actual accountability. Like, there's a societal consequence to you. Accountability seems to be the thing missing in all of this stuff, right? Like, hey, you know what? You want third graders to, or 3-year-olds to change their gender? Okay, the doctor that signed off on it and performed the surgery. If that kid comes back when they're an adult and says, I can't believe you did this to me.
Yeah.
Why is there no consequence to that? Why legal, financial, whatever it may be? Like, fine. You want accountability? Let's actually take it across the board and everything. But that's the thing. I think we can make so many bad decisions because accountability seems to only go one way.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And then especially, these senior leaders in our military, in our intelligence community, like they need to be held accountable. Like the guys who lied about the Russian bounties, like they're still out there. They still have security clearances. The 20 or so spies who said that the Hunter Biden laptop
was like 51 or whatever.
Yeah, like
insane.
former directors.
They're like, it's Russian disinformation. I'm like, well, why? Like,
and they knew.
Of course they knew.
Yeah.
And like they lied to the public, but it's like there's not even a consequence. They're given like contributorships at CNN.
Right.
There's like they're rewarded
Yeah.
for lying to the American public, and we're supposed to believe it like it is. Same with Comey, same with Strzok and McCabe. But some of those guys, like they lied before Congress. Like having done 50 hours or so in front of Congress, like if I put a comma in the wrong spot, I'd be in jail right now.
100%.
They're like, it's known they lied.
Yeah.
It's clear as day. There's no like ambiguity, and it's like, oh well, they're great. Well, they can be on CNN and they can talk about national security, and they can say and they do this from this holier than thou. I'm like, but you're a fucking liar. Like it's known, and like you're gonna talk about honor and like what are you talking about? You have none.
None whatsoever.
That's clear.
But there's like you said, there's two different justice systems. Like had I done half the crap those guys did.
Oh no, you'd be like,
we don't know my name.
You'd be at Gitmo, and I'd be like, hey, can I get a Starlink interview with Joe Kent? They're like, who? Never know. He no longer exists.
I'd be gone. Yeah, and the American people see that, so I do think there is a an appetite right now for accountability. Just yesterday, Corey Mills actually.
Corey's great.
Yeah, Corey's awesome. Submitted impeachment papers for Lloyd Austin for the withdrawal in Afghanistan. So it probably won't go very far.
Yeah, but I think
if we let these guys know we're on them.
I think that's the point. We have to. You got to fight the same way.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like we've been okay. Well, we disagree. They'll be like, but they'll impeach you. Like if you did the equivalent of what the left has done, they will end your life. They put you in the gulags.
Yeah.
And like we're like, we disagree. We're going to agree to disagree. I'm like, no, guys. Like that ship has sailed. Like if we're going to keep agreeing to disagree and not play by their same thing with voting.
Yeah.
Right? We want paper ballots. We want same-day voting. We want ID. That's wonderful. I agree. Yeah. Guess what? You don't get that until you're actually in power to legislate it. So you have to play the game on the battlefield that they have designated.
That's right.
They have that hand. They weaponized COVID to do it. Even the conservative people were pushed in scare tactics into camping out there. Well, I know, fine. Well, I don't want to be the bad guy because most people don't have the stomach for the way the left plays the game, and they've weaponized that for decades. Yeah. We have to do that. I mean, you're from Washington State. You've been running. You continue to do so. I think that's great because I think you're by far the strongest candidate, and we need strength because we can't have that coddling anymore.
That's right.
The coddling's gotten us here.
Yeah.
So talk about that in Washington State. Maybe the home of like woke bullshit.
Yeah, yeah.
Like like the ground of like just the worst case scenario of everything imaginable.
Yeah.
And talk about what we can do to start winning, to start pushing back, what needs to be done.
Yeah, it's huge. So Washington State, our politics are largely dictated by Seattle, and everybody knows Seattle, the Chaz and all that. My district actually is closer to Portland, Oregon, which is no better than Seattle. So we are we get it from the north and the south, but my district, I think like a lot of America is this way. We've got some suburbs that are probably more influenced by Portland, but a lot of conservatives live there because it's safer and the taxes are a little bit lower. But then once you get outside of those urban areas, you're a little bit off the highway, and it's salt of the earth. It's a lot of logging communities, a lot of fishing communities.
I've been there.
Just good, hardworking people. Yeah, great for the outdoors, good, hardworking people. However, we really just get drowned out by these major urban centers. And that's because the left, they effectively ballot harvest. Like, they don't waste time, maybe hoping that someone's going to vote for them. Like, with conservatives.
Yeah, we're like, oh, you're going to vote for us? That's awesome. We'll see you on election day. Yeah. They're like, no, give me your ballot. No. I want the ballot right now. I'm going to hand it in. And you can do that in Washington, right? Like it's like the most liberal, anyone can collect any ballot, hand it in. Yes. They can get a blank ballot, fill it out how they want, I imagine, or even if they can't, they will.
Yes. Yeah. The only thing you can't do is quid pro quo. You can't say, like, if you vote for that, I'll give you a gift card. But
I'm sure they're not doing any of that.
Yeah. That would be the left for sure. I mean, but what I think we need to do, and this is probably one of the bigger, people always say, hey, if you could go back and do the last election over again, what would you do? We were encouraging, I think we as Republicans were encouraging all of our people to get out and vote on election day because, like you said, that's how we want to vote. We have the best. Come hear me at a town hall, come listen to my speeches, and then use your own individual agency and initiative to vote for me. That's how we think as conservatives.
Then you get a snowstorm that day, and it's like, I can't get there.
Flat tire, your kid's sick, whatever.
The voting machine's not working this moment. Yeah.
Right. But the Democrats, we vote for like a month in Washington State. The Democrats are out chasing ballots the entire time, and I think that we can really start taking back our state, and I think the rest of the country is this way too. If we get folks in these rural communities, if we make sure they're out there voting, we had 80,000 Republicans who voted Republican in 2020 in my district who just didn't cast a ballot in 2022 because presidential cycles drive out more voters. Yeah. And so, but we're not going to take.
And you only lost by like 2,500 votes, right? And pretty small.
Yeah, less than a percentage point.
Margin. Yeah, so and then every you were probably outraised how much money to how much money?
Oh man, in the primary it was like 6-1, another 5-1 in the general. So
yeah, and you had a rough primary with a bunch of rhinos that.
Yeah, we took out one of the impeachment voters, so we're still proud of that.
That's nice. At least we got rid of that. But yeah, so I mean, you're up against a lot. Still came up that. So what are you going to do differently this time around?
Yeah, no, I mean, number one is the ballot harvesting game. And the good thing is 2022 was a big wake up for all of our county level and local activists because now we're all, coming up with strategies to ballot harvest. We're really going to get in the churches. Here's the thing, ballot harvesting works out well if your group of voters congregates in an area. Now, outside of urban centers, who congregates? It's conservatives, churches, sporting events, we have gun shows, probably like 3 or 4 every weekend where there's thousands of people showing up.
Register them and vote them.
Register them and vote them, and we can put drop boxes there. We can get our activists in front of them and just say, hey, have you voted yet? I'll follow you to your house and I will take your ballot from you. So that's something that we're really going to capitalize on this time.
I think that's smart. I mean, you just mentioned guns. I mean, I think didn't Washington State just pass some insane like?
They're trying to. Yeah, they're trying to right now.
So that basically it's effectively an assault weapons ban, right? Like
Yes.
just like no, it's sort of like the New York Safe Act, like
Yeah.
but like maybe even more extreme.
I think it's even more extreme because
Like,
basically
you just can't even.
the definition of assault rifle basically goes to anything that's a
BB gun.
a semi-automatic. You know, basically, if it's not a single shot.
So like you're plugged, 3-shot Benelli like duck gun is
Yeah.
now
it's
an assault weapon.
The language is written in a way that you can interpret it that way, and the same thing with a lot of pistols. They already went after our magazine capacity, so it's a full-on assault on our Second Amendment rights. Hopefully, it's not going to hold up in court. Right now, California, they passed a similar bill that's with the Ninth Circuit, so I don't know if the Ninth Circuit's actually going to do the right thing. They probably won't.
Well, the Ninth Circuit, I used to call it, that's where the Constitution goes to die.
Yeah.
But it does seem like there's been, again, it's a broad bench, but like it seems like there were some Trump appointees with the
Yes.
judges that they really focused on that actually was like, wait, that's like actually a reasonable interpretation of the Constitution
Yeah.
for the first time ever out of the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah.
So,
But they're definitely
hopefully you draw a bench, but I'm sure they'll gerrymander that as well and figure out a way to make sure that you don't
Probably,
when it comes to
yeah.
guns, right? I mean,
Yeah, and they're definitely coming after our right to bear arms for sure.
So, I know your neighbor, I guess, to the south, and perhaps a little bit to the east in Idaho, and I guess your neighbor to the south in Oregon. There's a talk about literally taking a component of Oregon and like incorporating it into Idaho because we're sick of this shit.
Yes.
Talk about that because like I see that like as someone from New York where like used to be welcomed everywhere. Now I'm probably like a pariah in like New York City. But if I go like an hour outside of the city, I'm getting high fives at gas stations and people are like, selfie, I love you guys, you're the best, it's the greatest. How long till that stuff actually starts happening? Because like, it's not like it's 12 people versus millions. It's like, a million versus a million one.
Yeah.
Perhaps more growing, but it's like where the million, like they're getting no representation whatsoever.
Yeah.
No account of their values,
That's right.
of their lifestyles, of the way they are, a farming community versus an urban community. And it's like, well, we get to pay for all that shit, but we don't actually get anything back.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, does that thing have legs? Can it happen? And is it a model for like the future? Because like I said, I come from places where it's like, I don't know how you exist
In the same state.
in the same. No, it just doesn't. You get to pay for it. You're taxed so much more heavily to fund bullshit that you get no benefit from.
Right.
And there's a whole sort of taxation without representation. I mean, this
For sure.
sort of started our separation
Same
from
concept, right? Yeah.
from England at the time. Like, how is this any different?
Yeah, I mean, so for folks who aren't familiar, there's a bunch of counties in eastern Oregon that are looking to become part of Greater Idaho, basically. And Oregon is, those counties are passing ballot measures to get them out of there. Idaho has said they would accept them as well. So I think it actually has a good deal of legs. I don't know what the exact timeline is. They're working that out. The thing is, Oregon, on the Oregon side, Salem and Portland are for it because they basically then would be able to clear the deck and they would be able to pass all this woke nonsense.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like almost like a agreed upon divorce between
Yeah.
people that just have
That in and of itself is a little bit
differences.
scary, but yeah.
It's a little bit scary, yeah. And I think Eastern Washington potentially could go the same way. I hope it doesn't because I'm in Southwest Washington and we're one of the conservative areas, so we need those folks on the east side.
What would you say,
Yeah.
conservative?
Yeah, we need the east side to help keep us a little bit sane away from the Seattle orbit. I hope Washington State stays intact, but however, we got to look at why this is happening and just how different the people that live in these urban hubs are and how they think from the folks that are in these more rural communities. Because I think that's the real divide in the country we have right now. It's not north or south or any of that stuff. I think it's really just urban versus rural.
Yeah, well, yeah, 100%. And I think one of the things that it's interesting, following you on social, and you guys should check them out. You actually talk about a lot of sort of interesting issues. You sort of engage on all the battlefronts, which is great. I think so many people just talk about the one thing that's going to be.
Yeah.
You actually talk about these sort of big, sort of all country affecting issues. And you were tweeting about OPEC, the other day, China trying to switch the wand to sort of let's call it the reserve currency of oil, and what that means to the average American. Like, basically oil is by mandate is traded in U.S. dollars right now for those who don't understand, and which it's like replace the gold standard almost.
That's right.
Right, and so it gives America the ability to run up a $32 trillion deficit and to spend so far beyond our means. And you were talking about sort of China's infiltration of that, trying to switch that, which disastrous consequences to America. Talk about that a little bit, because it's good to see people engaging in these things, not just talking about the local issue but like talking about the big picture. What does that say for American energy independence? What does it say about the future of our country? But and by the way, since I feel like so much of that $32 million is actually funding woke bullshit, maybe the left even wants to wake up to see how disastrous this actually is right now, because there's no more $1 billion for gender ideology programs in Pakistan, even if it's being stolen and buying creating the oligarch class in Pakistan. Like, that doesn't exist if you can't borrow.
That's right.
Because there's nothing backstopping it.
Yeah, I mean, right now the U.S. is the prime reserve currency holder. We've been the prime reserve currency holder since the end of World War II. That just means basically if you want to do an international transaction, you do it in the dollar. The underpinning of that in a very big way was OPEC. OPEC would only sell their oil to other countries in the dollar. And that gave us this almost dangerous ability to not produce a ton of real value.
We were able to live beyond our means, while the rest of the world was basically forced to live below their potential. And it's like, it's worked out well for America, but man, it doesn't seem sustainable.
No, I mean, it's not sustainable, especially since we hollowed out our industrial base. We don't produce things here anymore. We were starting to become energy independent, exporting energy under the Trump administration. Biden killed all that off. So we still need OPEC. However, the rest of the world is starting to see that, like, fundamentally, we have major problems here. They saw what happened in Afghanistan. They see us overextend throughout the entire world. They see that our economy is not doing well here with this Biden inflation. And now you have other countries that are hedging their bets. I mean, we really, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia was wrong to invade Ukraine, we
yes, it's funny that you have to caveat that. Like,
I have to.
Of course they were, but you're not allowed to say, like, it was a little weird that after a 50-year stalemate, we were like, let's incorporate Ukraine. We have a 500-mile buffer, between NATO and the Russian border.
Right.
And yeah, fuck that. We're just going to go right up on their border. Like, we're kind of, you're not allowed to say, like, we're the kind of ones leading on the encroachment thing. And I'm not saying it wasn't planned.
Yeah.
Or, maybe he's wanted to do this for a while. But, you'd also say half of Ukraine was like, considers themselves Russian, right? Like minor, these are semantics you're not allowed to discuss. But
exactly. And so when Putin did that and he invaded Ukraine, I mean, obviously you're right. I mean, the people that actually came up with the theory of containment that got us through the Cold War without firing a shot, they were like, big red flag, don't ever push NATO up onto Russia's border. Just sort of like, if Putin started doing regime change in Mexico City or Quebec, I think we'd probably do something about it. But when that...
Not really, because China's taken over a lot of the stuff in Mexico, and you know what I mean? Like, we're allowing that, right? They're pumping fentanyl through it, and someone says, hey, we got to hold the cartels accountable. It's on sovereign soil. I'm like, well, they're a literally far greater threat to us.
They're killing more
and Americans than anything Russia's done.
Exactly.
Probably ever. Maybe the threat was bigger in the 60s.
Right.
But like, the reality is nothing actually happened.
Yeah.
Beyond some sort of under the table spy shit. Like, they're just killing tens of thousands of Americans a year.
300 a day are getting killed by fentanyl.
And it's like, we can't engage the cartels. I'm like, what? Like, you're telling me they're not a clear and present danger to the United States of America and its citizens? And it's like,
can we at least build a wall? No, that's
racist. That's racist. But we can't finish the wall for $3 billion, but we can send 130 to the Ukraine with no accountability, no budgeting, who cares where the missiles really go?
So at the same time we're doing all this, we threw this massive sanctions package at Russia that basically said, Russians, you guys can't use the dollar anymore, you can't use the SWIFT banking system, and we thought that was going to be some massive smackdown to them.
And their currency went through the roof, literally the reverse effect, because the people making our decisions are morons.
Are idiots, the confluence of hubris and incompetence. And China came in and said, hey, don't worry about it. We've been working on this yuan system that we don't need to use the dollar anymore. And so you don't have to be a geostrategic genius to take a look at the map and see what happens when you combine Russia and China. That's a massive economic force right now. And then now you have Russia making deals and going to the Saudis and going to the Gulf nations and saying, hey, can we buy some of that oil with yuan? And hey, look, they see that we're weak. And so they're like, actually, you know what? The yuan seems like a pretty good option right now. Let's diversify our portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the nature of predation, right? Like, you've seen this in war, people seek out the weak target, and when nature seeks out, the weak person in the herd, and when you listen to Joe Biden on TV, not in a particular instance, but pretty much anytime he speaks, you can't help but be like, okay, like there's my window. Let's capitalize. Whatever the timeline for China taking over Taiwan, and I'm sure there was a timeline, but it's been like, let's just move that forward a couple of years, because we're exuding incompetence. We lead with it. The day Russia is meeting with China to discuss these sorts of things, like Joe Biden and the press, they have the cast of Ted Lasso in the way, and I'm like.
These guys are plotting to take down the dollar, and they've got some Hollywood people there. Yeah,
it's incredible.
No, it's up in your face.
Like, if I wasn't living it every day, I'd be like, we're being punked.
This is a
like it has to be. I asked. I was like, dude, guys, just please, someone blink 3 times if I'm just the guy. I'm the star of the Truman Show. Are they filming me? And it's like I'm supposed to because you can't imagine that what's going on is real, and yet it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they do these things to distract us, I think, from their incompetence and their scheming. But it's not being covered right now at all. If the dollar's even degraded, we are going to see inflation off the charts. I mean, right now, every American's already getting about a month their wages stolen because of Biden's inflation. Now, if we lose our status, or if our status is eroded, the people who are on the other side of this argument will say that the yuan is nowhere near strong enough to take down the dollar. They don't have to completely take down the dollar to erode some of our economy. And this is how China fights. China fights with hybrid warfare. They fight on the economic front.
Well, I mean, listen, we can't be naive to this. Everything they're doing, half of it's a psyop. Whether it's, fentanyl, obviously, how do you, degrade a population? You make everyone in fear of this. Everyone loses a kid. It doesn't matter. It just discriminates. It doesn't discriminate, right? Socioeconomic. You could be rich, poor, white, black. Doesn't matter. It's just killing everyone. Pushing. Let's talk about sort of the TikTok algorithm in China. If you're a kid and you're a physics nerd, it's you're a TikTok star because you're doing something productive. For us, it's let's take gender dysphoria and stick it down your throat so that every kid is well, I don't know, if I'm trans, I'm cool, and what could go wrong? Well, I'm gonna pump myself full of shit that no one knows what's gonna go on, and we're in a constant psyop.
We are,
but we're led by people who can't even see it.
Yeah, they're either in on it, or they can't see it, or they just have too many moneyed interest right now with this status quo. And the thing is, these people who have those interests of keeping our manufacturing base shipped overseas of China, all these different lucrative business deals with the Chinese Communist Party, they don't realize that this whole deck of cards is going to collapse. So for them to think that this is going to continue and then to gaslight the American people and just say oh no, you can't get rid of TikTok, that's an assault on the First Amendment. No, we can't bring back the manufacturing. Those days have gone. You're talking about some old-timey stuff. That's just never going to happen. Now, these are very real things we have to get serious about. And the same thing, energy independence. I think H.R. 1 that they're putting forth today to bring back American energy independence, I think that's going before Congress here in the next day or two. And you've already got the Democrats out there saying oh no, we can't be energy independent.
Climate change, because everything is racist or climate change. Literally, the cause of and solution for all of life's problems is racism or climate change. That's all they have. Now you bring up something that has nothing to do with any of those things, and they will still turn it into that. I mean, we've seen that as a response, but it's how do you stay in the fight when you're up against that much insanity, right? Because I think that's the biggest thing. We said it earlier, but people need to know they got to stay engaged. I mean, how do the people of Washington? I mean, it's clear to me that you're the fighter that they actually need for this insanity. How do they find you? What keeps you motivated? Obviously, I imagine the legacy of what you've gone through, both from
definitely.
life experience, your wife, but how do you stay in this game, and how do you what's your message to them to prevent them from getting discouraged? Because you've been through about as bad an experience, and you're out there still fighting, and that I think is just incredible. That is the America I know, love, believe in, and want to support, and that's why I'm fighting to preserve that mentality. But man, that's not easy.
No, it's not. I mean, I'm in this for my kids. I'm in this for the legacy of my wife and so many other Americans who are buried in Arlington National Cemetery to preserve our country. That's the big picture. That's what's in my heart. But also, you got to kind of, if you're going to go into a fight, you got to be a little nasty. And the Democrats are a lot nasty. They're
vicious. By the way, I'm jealous in the sense that I'm man, they're so much better at this than us. Now, maybe it's why a guy like me has been able to have a platform. I've never run for office. I've never done, but they're okay. Don's insane enough to actually fight. He's that guy. I like that guy because he's how does everyone else get there?
I think the big thing is to not buy into the psyop. The biggest psyop the Democrats have right now, and they have some sophisticated ones, but the biggest one they have right now is that they are going to be able to rig and steal every single election, so don't even bother voting. And I hear this from conservatives all the time.
Yeah.
The guys just like, my vote doesn't matter. And it's like, no. Your vote matters. What they fear the most, they wouldn't need that psyop right there if your vote didn't matter.
Correct.
So if you stay engaged, and you don't have to run for Congress, but if you show up to school board meetings, you
Show
get
up.
involved in your GOP, I mean, and then you
Yep.
get out there and you vote, you make sure your neighbors vote, you help us ballot harvest if it's legal in your state, you register people to vote, that right there, that terrifies the left.
Yeah, because people say that. They're like, Don, like, I can't really run for Congress. I'm like, you don't have to run for Congress. Like, get involved at your school board. Like, if we could take back our schools,
Yep.
Because I mean, it's so much harder when, and I saw it with my kids in schools in New York City, and like, the indoctrination is real, man. It is like, you can't do that. You can't, like, so you get a kid back after 18 years of this shit, 20 years of this stuff, from starting at, and it's like, it's really hard to get them to, we've been brainwashed.
Oh, yeah.
That's real. But, if we can take over our schools, and, I know, so one of the sponsors of the show, Patriot Mobile, like, they gave back and fought back down in Dallas where they're based, and like literally flipped a school board to conservative, and like immediately mainstream, like what you mean, it's a conservative leading board that represents conservative people, like in a conservative district, and they're like, we don't have the purple-haired freak that was doing the bidding of the communists like on the board anymore. It's like they donated money to, and they were painted as like a terrorist organization for donating to have people whose children are actually in attendance in these schools, whose parents shared these values, like those people were in charge of the children. It was so, I'm looking, I'm like, and like major news were like, these people donated to this. I'm like, that's good. Like, I want Patriot Mobile doing that. Like, why would we not want a school board comprised of people that's actually representative of the people of the district, or the way they vote, their belief systems, like they're religious Americans? Oh my God, I know that's a terrorist organization in your mind, whatever mainstream paper was writing it, but like.
And they wouldn't have freaked out if it wasn't important.
Correct.
If it was just like, the school board, who cares about the school board? They wouldn't have freaked out.
When they have losses that don't matter, it's like it never happened.
Yeah.
When they have losses that matter, and they understand that, like, wait a minute, is this the beginning of the wave to end the indoctrination? It's like, now they're going to go after it. That's why I was like, these guys, they literally sponsor my show, and I'm like, that takes balls. It's like, I'm going to say something that's going to offend, my opening monologue's going to probably get me canceled at least by a couple leftist organizations for this very show.
Sure.
Something you say between now and the end of the week, you are literally the worst. Like, you are a terrorist, racist, misogynist, homophobe, whatever it may be. You don't have to be talking about anything. You can say, Merry Christmas, and that's enough to trigger them, because that's a microaggression.
Right.
But like, it's why I talk about that. Like, my last show was sort of about the patriot economy. Like, we have to stop feeding that beast. We have to get involved and push back where we can, and we also have to stop feeding it, because they've shown, that they will weaponize anything they can against you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the alternative economy, I think that's absolutely essential. Just buying as much local things as you can from businesses that support your agenda. I mean, there's
I literally, like,
things you can
I
do.
helped get helping a buddy, Michael Seifert. He was actually on the show on Monday.
Nice.
He started Public Square.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like, it's a website and an app. Like, you can be like, okay, these guys, they sign off to the like, they're for freedom, they're for this. Like, if you're on the app, you believe what we believe.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, well, if you're going to search anyway, like, go there.
Go there.
Like, which coffee shop? Like, put this guy's who believes what you believe in, who's a good, patriotic American, like, put his kid through hockey camp or practice. Not like Starbucks, who, is literally taking a percentage of your money and donating it to, like, the radical, the radical movements of our country, who have shown to be total frauds anyway, but like, that doesn't matter. They get to post their black square and virtue signal to no end. And so, that's such a key tenet of the show. Like, we got to fight back on all of these things, and you don't have to run for Congress. Like, go to Public Square, like, go on the app and just be like, hey, I'll buy from this business.
Yeah.
If you're traveling, find the coffee shop that's, you may not know. Like, it's so easy to push back, and you take the purse strings, you fight back on the school board level, like, hey, maybe you'll find you're actually good at this. And you'll take it further and go get more involved and more involved. But you don't have to go to that extreme right off the bat.
And vote too. I mean, I think most people, everybody's going to follow the presidential cycle, because that drives, a lot of the news cycle. midterms are absolutely essential. But then like these off election years, 2023, like we have a bunch of municipal elections, we have school board elections, for people to get out and make sure they vote in every single one of those, because the Democrat machine never ever stops. But if we can engage our people and come up with our own machinery that makes sure we get our people into these positions, we'll take our country back.
Yeah, and by the way, even if there's just a few people there watching, like catch them in the act, call it out. It just make it harder for them to get away with the murder, essentially that they've been committing while pretending that this is all above board, right? So how do our viewers find you? How do they help you support in your cause? Like, give them everything. Because again, it's so rare on our side, unfortunately, to find people who are willing to engage the way you do.
Absolutely, yeah. JoeKentForCongress.com. That's the website. Joe Kent 16JAN19 on Twitter, Getter, Truth Social, Facebook, all that. So JoeKentForCongress.com is a place where folks can go and make a donation. We're coming up on the end of the reporting quarter, so if anybody can give any amount, we raised $3.2 million last election cycle.
Wow.
No PAC money.
That's a big money. It's big money in Congress. Like especially a rural Congress, right?
Like, it was all individual donations. Our average donation was like $50. So people,
and you were still outspent by what?
Still outspent by like 5 to 1.
Yeah, it's like that's what we're up against, right? California's donating to the people, New York is donating to your opponent. Like, it's not the people from your state that are actually even supporting this. It's like they're just giving all this money because the discrepancy in what the left is able to raise is so insane. It makes it hard. I mean, imagine every fight you had 5 to 1 odds. Like, it's brutal. And so to only miss it by 2,500 votes, but like, I love that wasn't enough to be like, okay, well, it didn't work out. I'll go back to doing something else. I love, Joe, that you're in the fight. I love the way you're fighting it. It matters. So, guys, go check them out. Do that. And, hey, man, I just wanted to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's really important.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Well, thank you very much to Joe Kent. Guys, check him out, support him, and also support our incredible sponsors. I told you about Goldco earlier in the show. If you want to diversify your portfolio, if you think, as I do, that that's more important than ever, gold and silver can protect your retirement savings from inflation and dollar devaluation, and also protect it from the insanity that is the decision-making process of these radical leftists, right? Owning tangible, physical, inflation hedging gold and silver can diversify that portfolio. So check them out. Go to donjuniorgold.com. They've helped thousands of Americans to diversify and protect their retirement savings. Go to donjrgold.com. You've seen what's going on in the stock market. You've seen banks collapse. You may not want to have all your eggs in one basket. So if you're going to go check out precious metals, learn from the people at Goldco. Check them out. No obligation. They will get you the information that you can make an informed decision. Seems to make sense to me. What's the worst that can happen? Go check them out at donjuniorgold.com. And if by chance in 2023 you happen to have a cell phone, which I imagine is literally everyone, don't forget Patriot Mobile, America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Frankly, the only wireless provider that I'm even aware of that it hasn't gone fully woke. AT&T's parent company is trying to cancel OAN and Newsmax off of cable because they're conservative. Like, it's crazy to me. So you're going to have a cell phone in your pocket. Support Patriot Mobile, who puts your values first. They donate a portion of every dollar they earn to support groups to fight for the things that we believe in, whether it's the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the right to life, our first responders and law enforcement, these incredible, brave men and women in America. So go to patriotmobile.com/Don Jr., get free activation. You're going to have a cell phone anyway. Why don't you have it with someone? A mobile carrier that supports your values. So patriotmobile.com/DONJR. And again, thank you to Joe Kent. Thank you to you guys for all of your support in everything that we do. I'm going to go live on Locals now. So for those of you who are over there, we'll click over. I'm probably going to have to do that remote because I'm going with Joe right now, or as soon as I get done with that, to a fundraiser. But I'll do it, on the way before we get there, trying to make sure that we get guys like this elected and or reelected. We need to fight for our country. Everything is on the table. The other side has made that abundantly clear. So don't sit it out. Don't feel broken. Don't go quarrel in a corner, and suck your thumb crying for mommy. That's what they want. Stay engaged, push back, and it's time to say enough is enough. You guys are the best. I'll see you over on Locals.